My name is Kriana Barat. I'm a researcher at the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre, and I'll be chairing this week's webinar. Today, we will be hearing from NDARC's own Professor Rebecca McKetton. Rebecca leads a program of research into stimulant use, epidemiology, and interventions. And today, she will be talking on the TINA trial, a living experience of trialling mirtazapine for methamphetamine use. Rebecca has lined up the wonderful Dr. Jeremy Haler to join us for a panel discussion after the talk. Jeremy is a senior staff specialist and a principal investigator on the trial from the Brisbane side. To maximise time with the panel, we'll take questions in the Q&A box, so please drop them in there as we go along and we'll try to get through as many as we can. Before we begin, I'd like to start by paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the land that I am on today, which are the Whadjuk Noongar people. I'd like to extend that respect to elders past, present, and that same respect to any First Nations people joining us here today. At this time, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Professor McKetton. If you could please turn your camera and mic on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kriana. It's lovely to be here today, and thank you for all coming along to watch this online presentation. So today I'll be talking about the TINA trial. And in case you're not familiar with the TINA trial, I think we have the wrong slide there. It's quite funny. How do I get back to the start? I'm so sorry. Yeah, the TINA trial is a randomised, placebo-controlled, double-blind phase 3 trial of mirtazapine for methamphetamine use. It was funded by the MRFF under a particular stream of funding that was designed to repurpose medications, essentially. And mirtazapine, you might know, is a generic antidepressant drug. And a couple of phase 3 trials that had happened in the USA, smaller trials, have found that it was effective in reducing methamphetamine use. But these were quite small trials. They excluded people with depression. They were on men who had sex with men, and they were very tightly controlled. So one had 60 people, one had 120 people. And we felt that there's enough information there to make us feel confident that this was a medication that potentially had utility in clinical practice. But to demonstrate that, we needed to roll it out in a more normal environment, a more routine clinical practice setting, include women in the sample, have a broader sample of people who use methamphetamine that might have depression, which from my experience is quite a lot. So we obtained good funding under the MRFF scheme to trial this. That was back in 2020, and 5 years on, we're at the close of the trial and we're finished recruitment. But what I want to do today is not tell you the results. Unfortunately, we've only just unblinded, and that's going to be under embargo for a little while yet. But I want to take you behind the scenes and introduce you to the people involved with this trial. When you see the results, you don't see all the work that goes into these trials. We've been very successful at recruiting for this particular trial. We've had amazing follow-up, 86% at our final endpoint at 12 weeks. And I really want to give credit to the people who work behind the scenes to do this. So before I do that, I will introduce you to those people and then tell you a little bit about the trial. And then we'll see a video that interviews some of these people. Firstly, our trial investigator team. I don't think I've even captured all of them here, but there's over 20 of them who are involved, who worked on the trial throughout its life. And even more important, the TINA trial research team, who are the people who are out in the field doing all of the assessments and are responsible for the fantastic recruitment and follow-up rates on the study. Now, rather than me talk to you about what the trial involved, I'm going to play a video. And from this video, you'll just, in a couple of minutes, get a pretty, hopefully, good overview of what we did. So we did a couple of things that are a little bit different in our trial than what you might see in regular trials, like oncology trials. And I just want to tell you a little bit about those innovative aspects of the trial before you meet our team, so you understand what they're talking about. The first thing you'll already see from all of our logos is we went to a lot of trouble to brand the trial in a way that would relate to people who use methamphetamine or crystal meth or ice. And we also used a lot of online tech, including social media. And we had a dedicated social media campaign, and Taylor Deegan, who worked with us as postdoc, managed that to try and specifically target people who use methamphetamine through Facebook, TikTok, Insta, and other kind of social media platforms. And then if people saw our QR code and our ad, what they could do is go online, and we had a secure portal, and they could put in their name and where they were, and one of our lovely research officers would contact them by email or phone and get in touch, tell them a bit more about the study and see if they're interested. And I think that was it was an amazing form of recruitment. We also did a lot through services and word of mouth, but I think that this was a very reliable and consistent form of recruitment for us. The other thing that we did was we embedded research officers into our clinical trial sites. And we found that it was hard in drug and alcohol services to run the clinical trial with the limited resources that were available there already. And our assessments are quite hefty. So rather than put that burden onto the clinic staff, we had researchers. In this case, you'll see here Lily, one of our researchers working with Dr. Michael Christmas over in Perth. And they were in the service and they worked collaboratively with the doctors, but Lily would do all of the assessments, all of the screenings, and then Michael would take over the medical responsibility. So they work as a team. The beauty of this for us was it gave us the flexibility to do things that were completely precluded from the procedures at the health service. So one of the things that we love to do is interview people in the field. This is a technique that I picked up from doing epi research and longitudinal cohort research. You get much better follow-up if you go out and find the participants rather than waiting for them to come to you. So you'll hear later from Lily and our other research officers how they went about doing this. We were online, so we have people all over Australia doing this work, and it meant that we're pretty much a purely remote team, and we had a lot of fun at our Christmas parties. But you'll notice even in this presentation that we're so used to working online that the video that you will see at the end of this is basically had to be created using all online technology because we're all around the country. Every 6 months we will get together though and have an absolute hooch, and we're all here at the moment in the building and looking forward to catching up this evening for a bit of a social now that we're finished the trial. I will now hand over to Laura Daniels, who's very kindly put this video together. I haven't actually seen it myself, so I'm very excited to have a look at it. Thank you, Laura.
I had the fortunate privilege of being involved for the full duration of the trial. With some of my lived experience, I was already looking at participating in, services that were looking to use people who had with experience of either using or having used drugs for the development of their service. So I emailed her. And to my absolute horror, Laura, she replied, I wasn't expecting this. And anyway, so that kicked off our relationship. I did ask some consumers, and first off, this first image there of the drug itself was activating for everyone. The pills, the pictures of the pills implied illness and were unrelatable to methamphetamine use, as was the chemical bonding and the others. So the only two images that spoke to consumers the most were the two with the black screen and the smoke. Some people even said that the large T in the bottom, gave them ideas around intravenous drug use. Images can mean. It was interesting that this came from some of the members on the research team that, they thought maybe the dark background was a little bit too depressing, and that maybe something more colourful and upbeat would be appropriate. And I think this is probably the value right here of the lived experience in terms of my experience of being in this space, and also of others being in this space alongside me, is that any rainbows and unicorns have well and truly exited the building by this point. Things are a bit grim, certainly not happy.
Yeah.
It hasn't come to, using hasn't come to represent fun and parties anymore. It's an existence, it's a coping, it's I need this to continue to function in the world as it is. That was, it was interesting that, some of the team wanted something more upbeat, yet that probably wouldn't have spoken to people seeking to reduce their methamphetamine use. And if I saw this in a GP, in a general practice, waiting room, or any other service waiting room, I would have been drawn to it myself.
TINA trial has managed to introduce a lot of participants or clients to the service who have never traditionally accessed AOD treatment services, and I think that's really an interesting observation. What we find is that obviously our participation not only contributes to advancing our scientific understanding, but I think it's really important in reaffirming the critical importance of offering people opportunities for empowerment. I sense that they often are appreciative that they are taking charge of their health, their recovery, and at the same time contributing positively to the wider society.
I think, like you said, it's more than just offering a service to people or, medical assistance, but it's how you offer that. And Vanessa played a key role in that, I believe. Willie's spoken about empowering patients, participants. What did that look like, I guess?
So we had a really overwhelming response on the register. So initially the idea was to just operate out of the central DASA site, but I was able to actually, work with the doctors and the other DASA sites down south and up north to be able to facilitate seeing participants in a more convenient location for them. I think something different as well that I offered as a researcher that I know other researchers on the TINA trial did as well, but something that's not necessarily available to SA Health clinicians is being able to meet the participants in the community. So, being able to meet them at a coffee shop or a McDonald's, or, giving them a phone call instead of seeing them face to face to actually keep them engaged was really important, I think, and, why we're able to retain the amount of people that we did, because it was really, trying to fit in with their circumstances.
I'm really interested to know, with your involvement, have you or your clinic been involved in a trial like this before?
Well, thanks for asking. No, in short, we haven't. The TINA trial is the first multi-centre RCT that my service has been involved with, and we've really found NDARC and the trial team to be very, very helpful and effective in supporting really research development in WA. The NDARC team really went an extra length or an extra mile to help us, because developing this and getting it from the ground and from an idea into practice is something that took a lot of work over a number of years, as our service wasn't really set up for research. There wasn't really a research department, if you like, and we were under an organisation called the Mental Health Commission, which really doesn't have that role. In terms of the participants that I saw, so clinically and in the research study, I saw a large proportion of people that weren't seeking standard treatments. So the talking therapies that we have, the peer support networks that we would normally advise, they're really particularly interested in, is there a medication that can help me fix this problem? The other couple of other things I noticed was that a large proportion of the patients, my guess was more than 50%, anecdotally, were full-time employed. That's not the cohort that I would see in my clinic under normal treatment circumstances for either methamphetamine use disorder or alcohol or opiate use disorder for that matter. Kind of idea of what someone who uses methamphetamine heavily would look like, and they'll look thin, and that's not really what we saw. So they're the major differences or new things that I think I would comment on.
I've heard incredible things about the TINA trials, retention rate and follow-up rate, particularly at the sites you were involved in. So my question for you is, how did you achieve this exceptional retention rate and follow-up rate, which is rare in trials involving people who use methamphetamine?
Thanks, Laura. Great question. So I think a lot of the time it was due to the overall funding that we had for the trial, which sort of allowed us to have a lot of flexibility with what we could demand from the service and the doctors and all those staff sort of involved in the day-to-day procedures of the trial. I think that was extremely important for getting the assessments booked in on sites and sort of getting participants seen if they had any concerns, and I think that they really appreciated that. I also think a lot of it was in the training that we had as research officers. We were very lucky to have lots of opportunities with training to build those skills. And I think as well, just building the rapport with the participants, whether it was sort of learning the name of their pets or potentially even sort of getting a bit of information about their favourite soccer team, creating a little bit of friendly rivalry. I think it was really important to personalise the experience of the participants and make them feel just as comfortable as possible. We're reimbursing participants for their time and for returning their medication bottles as well. And so I think it was really important to, like you said, honour people's time, and it's also a strong incentive for attending those assessments.
Working with people where they are participants, but we're working with people, and so life happens, things happen. We're working with these people for 5 to 6 months at a time.
Being part of a trial like this, which involves close, sustained engagement with people, like you said, people with whole lives navigating complex challenges, I can imagine it can be incredibly rewarding, but also at times emotionally demanding. So how has that experience, I guess, impacted you personally or professionally as a research officer?
Being a research officer, working with the population that I have genuinely seen it as such a blessing. I have absolutely loved my job, my role, and it's truly an honour when people can feel that they can open up to you. And so at times it can be emotionally demanding, it's true. It can be a hard slog. I've been here since August 2022, and so really I've seen this from the start to the finish, which I'm really thankful for. And so certainly it's There have been times where it's been a little bit tough. You're doing, 4 or 5 eligibility assessments in a day. You're meeting people and it can be a lot. The opportunities that we've had to go professional development and to go to symposiums, to go to conferences, again, and that's because TINA Trial has been so well resourced. It's really built my capacity and also further developed my passion for alcohol and other drug research.
I think sometimes as a clinician researcher, they can often be seen separately and not kind of interconnect in any way. And so I think it was really important for us to think about, like, how can my experience or skills as a clinical psychologist be utilized in this way? It allowed me to create a safe, non-judgmental and empathetic space. I was also not their manager. And so I think this is really important, as it ensured that what we discussed in these sessions didn't impact on their employment in any way, or that it wasn't perceived to impact that. My clinical skills enabled me to assess the impact of different situations on the research officers. So when they would bring kind of different, situations and experiences into these support sessions, for me to be able to identify that, even if they didn't immediately recognize it for themselves. So, for example, I could offer strategies for managing anxious thoughts, particularly if, say, a participant hadn't responded to a phone call and there were maybe risk concerns. So, we would maybe discuss how to maintain professional boundaries whilst dealing with potential risks. And I guess kind of doing so was really crucial in helping the research officers navigate challenging situations without overstepping their role as a research officer.
What advice would you give to clinician researchers working on trials similar to this, involving complex or vulnerable populations?
Yeah, I think it's a really good and important point you raise, Laura, because I don't think it's often at the forefront of people's minds when they are developing or running a clinical trial, is ensuring that the research officers, particularly those working with complex or vulnerable populations, that they have the support. One research officer shared how valuable the support sessions were for helping them navigate, just the balance between managing or developing assertiveness skills as well as empathy in this role. So they mentioned and shared with me that the sessions helped me clarify what my role was and how to redirect participants' requests when necessary. This research officer also shared how the sessions were particularly helpful when dealing with challenging participants, such as those who maybe spoke about trauma, including, say, domestic violence. They said it was reassuring to have scheduled time to reflect on how these interactions impacted me personally and professionally, which I didn't always have the time to do while juggling recruitment and assessments. Having this time with you was crucial for my development and ability to show up with more awareness and strength in future interactions.
Wow, what an amazing compilation of interviews. I'll now invite Rebecca and Jeremy both to turn your cameras and mics on, if you don't mind. And I'd like to start by thanking Rebecca for your opening presentation, and to the NDARC Comms team for all their efforts in compiling that video. That was so insightful. I have so many questions, but welcome, Jeremy, first off. Thank you for making time to be here today. I wondered if I might start by asking you, give you an opportunity as a principal investigator on this trial. How was your experience working on the TINA trial?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the research associates or assistants were invaluable, and having the time and the energy and the commitment really helped us to recruit volunteers for the study and retain them. And as has been already highlighted, I think the retention is amazing, because generally our experience of people who've been using methamphetamine is they might turn up once or twice and then they disappear again into the woodwork. So I think that was a real credit to the organisation and the support provided by the RAs. So that was one experience. Michael mentioned employment, and same in Brisbane. A lot of our patients maintain long-term employment. This isn't the kind of stereotype of a methamphetamine user, and nor typically is it someone who comes to us for treatment. So that was a bit of an eye-opener for me, that there are many people who are, although they want to manage their use, they're also maintaining their day-to-day function. And that's quite an interesting observation, I think. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for that. I have a few more questions that I would like to prioritize, but I will just ask everybody watching at the minute, please feel free to drop any questions that you might have in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to get through them. I wonder, Rebecca, did you have anything else to add with regards to your experience working on this trial generally? And we can go into more specific details, but to add to anything that we've just heard about.
I actually don't think I do have too much to add, Kriana. I think it's just been amazing, the support from the team and how many different people have been involved with this. And just to reiterate that, and as Jeremy said, I mean, the research assistants have been really dedicated and amazing. It's also people like Jeremy who give them cards whenever they reach a certain milestone in recruitment, bring them cakes, and always been accessible. And I think that's one thing that I'm aware of with Jeremy, for example, a lot of our trial doctors, is that they are accessible. So things happen in people's lives. And if there is an emergency because we can't find someone and we're worried about them, or there's a serious adverse event that needs taking care of, Jeremy's always just been able to step in and go, okay, I'll take a quick look at it. And that's made our life so much easier.
It really speaks to the team dynamic, and we saw from the pictures all at the beginning how large that team is, and I can't even imagine trying to manage such a geographically dispersed group. It sounds like you guys did a really amazing job being able to maintain that that sort of collaboration and community, and the support as well, the professional personal development. I feel like somebody with fairly limited clinical trial experience, that seems really, really special. So congratulations on that. One of the things that was mentioned a couple of times was the really high retention rate that you guys had. And so that demonstrates sort of a demand for this treatment. Can you tell us sort of, were you expecting that? It seems to be that there was lower retention in previous trials. Some of the research officers in that video spoke to how they connected with the participants. Were there other like study-specific sort of things that you implemented to really engage people over the trial?
Absolutely. Historically, retention rates in stimulant treatment trials is low. It's lower than other trials. I know it's hard in any trial, but it's particularly challenging in the context of stimulant treatment. My expectations for this trial were at least 80%. And I had that expectation because I've done previous research that involves follow-up, and we've been able to achieve that. And we've been able to achieve it by doing field interviews and reimbursing people adequately, and making sure that the people working on the trial had good rapport skills. We reduce the stigma associated with using methamphetamine, kind of meet people in a comfortable way that makes them feel comfortable. So when I came into the clinical trial space, I noticed that a lot of these trials that were going on were being conducted in clinics, and they expected people to turn up at the clinic, and they might have to drive 3 hours to get there, but this was an expectation that it was on the client that they had to get to the clinic, they had to take the medication. It was a little bit impersonal. The other thing is they often have very burdensome procedures. Researchers, when they do finally get that grant, they want to put every measure in there that they can. And the assessment takes 3 hours, and they want to measure their brains and measure their memory. And we don't. We try very hard not to do that. And so we do things like building into the protocol the opportunity to go out into the field and do interviews with people at a location that's convenient to them. In Biala, that was often not necessary because it has a really big catchment and people often come in, so it made recruitment very easy. But in situations where people are frightened of coming into a service because they've never been there before, it's very helpful to go and meet them. We reimburse them, and we try to keep the assessment procedures very tight and very focused on what's relevant.
And can I just add, Rebecca, at the end of an interview when we were admitting a patient into the study, I kind of made a point of saying, look, thank you very much for agreeing to participate in this. It's really helpful and we greatly appreciate your time and effort. So I tried to make them feel special in a way, that they were involved in something which might help others. And I think people do respond to that.
Most definitely. Speaking to sort of those strategies that we use as part of a trial, Jeremy, one of the questions we have is, have services thought about how they might engage those clients who are employed or potentially even, living quite far away from the services, and potentially being more flexible in how you offer your regular services?
Well, it happens that this is the day of the month when I do a late clinic, so we try and look after patients who may be working by having a clinic open till 7 p.m. We also do phone interviews where needed. So we try and provide a flexible and responsive approach. And I think we did that in the trial, and we also try and do it to some extent in our clinical practice, though maybe we could do more.
I mean, late nights definitely make things easier in some aspects, so that's really great to hear. Again, on the topic of people who might be working, one of the questions we have from Diane is, did those who were employed consider their use of methamphetamine to be a problem? Happy to go to either of you.
Jeremy?
Okay. Well, I think the fact that they were willing to embark on this study and 12 weeks on treatment indicated that they did want to manage their use and reduce their use. So I think, although it wasn't a condition for entry into the study, I think almost all the participants were interested in whether this medication would help and whether it would result in a reduction or indeed a cessation of use. We don't know the results yet from the blinding. Rebecca's still got all that information hidden, but we're very eager to hear.
That'll be for an upcoming webinar. Super excited to see those revealed. Did you have anything to add to that?
I think it's important to consider that there are different types of treatment out there, and if you're employed, and I think Jeremy's kind of already touched on this, that going to rehab, for example, is not necessarily a good option. So this is a treatment that might appeal more to those type of people because they can take the medication home. They don't have to have so much clinic contact, and then they can get on with their lives. And often they have very busy lives. They might have jobs, children, and things to do.
And isn't life busy sometimes? You mentioned that there'd been a couple of trials previously, I think you said in the US. What motivated you, Rebecca, to think that this drug could work?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I did think it could work, which I know is really strange, but it was already being used and there are these 2 trials out there. So in my mind, it wasn't so much about, oh, this is a drug that I think could work and we have to trial it. It's actually very pragmatic. There's a lot of off-label prescribing going on in our field, and people are using things without any, I shouldn't say good evidence that they work, but there's not really strong evidence about whether or not they work and what the risks are attached to using them. And so we needed a really good, strong trial to see, well, does this actually work when you put it into practice, and what are the risks? So that was really my motivation. And if you want to talk to the mechanisms, I can bore you silly with those. I mean, the 3 things that people say, most people say, oh, it'll help them sleep, and that's the mechanism because it's a sedative, has sedative properties. The other thing is it's an antidepressant drug, and if you looked at people going to treatment for methamphetamine use, quite a lot of them experience symptoms of depression, and often quite severe. So, and at the moment, a lot of the available antidepressants aren't particularly good for using with people who use methamphetamine because of contraindications, risk of toxicity. Mirtazapine seems to be fairly safe. So it'd be like, well, if we could provide an antidepressant that helps with the depression, you might then help with the methamphetamine use. Because methamphetamine, for those people out there are not too familiar with it, used to be used as an antidepressant drug. It has really strong antidepressant properties. the third thing is via serotonin changes. It's acting on areas of the brain involved with reward. It's the same mechanism that's underpinning its therapeutic effects in depression. So that would be a nice mechanism, but we don't know. And it's often the case with medications.
Yeah, so interesting. Picking up on your use of the term off-label and also the funding mechanism under which the TINA trial was funded is using medicines that are already in the used within the community, prescribed through the community, and then using it for a different indication. Speaking to that, Jeremy, the question, what did you find satisfying about being involved in this trial in the sense of being able to sort of repurpose an existing medication?
Well, I think having something to offer people, not just, a 5-day withdrawal program with some diazepam, that really made a difference. And providing hope, we obviously tried to not exaggerate, but suggest that there may be benefits here, and there are very limited other treatments which have provided any benefit. Talking to Rebecca the other day, really, there have probably been 10 or 20 different classes of medications which have been trialed with very limited success. So we weren't promising anything, and we explained they were having a placebo or an active agent. We weren't sure which, and nor were they. We sometimes were able to guess. One thing Rebecca didn't mention was appetite. And often when people have been using methamphetamine, they stop eating properly. So that was one of the other advantages with mirtazapine, that it might help to correct that aspect of well-being, if you like. So those were some of my thoughts.
So interesting, and bravo for persevering with trying to find something that you can offer in that form. We've spoken about the really high retention rates. We appreciate that we can't go into the positive, or the findings at least, of how effectively it worked. But I wonder, Rebecca, can you report on any of the adverse reactions that you might have uncovered through this trial?
So the adverse reactions, we haven't actually looked at that in the unblinded data, so I can't comment on how that panned out in this study. But it has a very well-established safety profile, and we know what the adverse reactions are. And certainly what we saw amongst the people in the trial was consistent with that. Sedation is one of the most common complaints, drowsiness, foggy kind of thinking. And that was a complaint of people who said, well, we've got people to take it at night so that hopefully that would help them sleep and they wouldn't be too hungover in the morning, if you like. But that was a complaint. And there are the other side effects, it weren't too bad. That was probably the major one. The appetite increases, we got a lot. So it'd be interesting to look at whether it's impacted BMI. We expected that the population would be underweight. That wasn't the case. So we'll be interested to see, to what extent that will be an issue. I would note that 25% of people in the trial discontinued the trial medication. They might have been on placebo. Sometimes people go, well, clearly this isn't doing anything. I'm out of here. But that's where that tolerability issue came up, that a few people discontinued because they said, look, I need to do a lot of things, and this is making me feel too kind of groggy in the mornings, and I don't like it.
Yep. That's an interesting side effect. We have some congratulations or acknowledgements of a really great trial that you've undertaken. So just wanted to note that for you both. We have a question. Are you able to report what proportion of trial eligible people actually agreed to participate?
Wow.
So you mentioned the recruitment forms that you had, that you used a variety of different sort of social media recruitment strategies.
Yeah.
What proportion of those might have engaged?
Okay, so it's funny because before this, we started this webinar, I opened up what we call our statistical analysis plan, which has a consort diagram in it, just in case anyone asks this, but now it's closed, I can't see it. So we did screen over the phone 1,267 participants. A lot of those people we couldn't get back in contact with. to do a face-to-face eligibility, even if they were eligible. So that's, and then from that, we probably did about 450 face-to-face eligibility assessments. And then the same problem occurred. We couldn't find people to get back to the actual baseline of the study and randomize them. And in the end, we randomized 344. Our target was 340. And it was funny, at the end of the trial, we kind of accidentally overshot that. But then it turned out that 5 of our participants hadn't shown up for their baseline, even though they were randomized. So we ended up with 339 in the sample. So that gives you an idea of how it translates. A lot of that was just simply people waitlisted because we had too much demand at a particular time, or we couldn't find them. The main reasons why people weren't eligible, strangely, we're not using enough methamphetamine. And if they weren't eligible, if they're on antidepressant medication, because we're prescribing an antidepressant. So they were the main reasons. Or out of area. Even though we tried very hard to target our advertising, we were getting people ringing up from all over Australia, and they just weren't near one of our trial sites.
Speaking more to those recruitment strategies, could you say which of the different social media campaigns, thanks Jonathan for that phrasing, had the highest yield? Which was most effective?
You mean in terms of platforms like Facebook? And yeah, look, I'm old. I only know about Facebook. I understand it was also advertised on Insta. I think our cohort are an older cohort, and maybe that's because our primary advertising was on Facebook. But it's also just something that we find in most studies. I think by the time people are looking for treatment, they are a little bit older. So most of them would have probably come through Facebook, but that was not, we weren't comparing, and I don't think that data we've got could actually accurately compare. And I would also just emphasize that it wasn't the only thing. So when we started, we got a lot of people through Biella just by advertising. We put stickers on the needle packs going out of the needle and syringe program, for example. We'd put stickers on water bottles and give them out, all kinds of different things. And that word of mouth, we got a lot of people through that as well. It was just convenient, the social media stuff, because you can turn it on and off like a tap. Like you can go, oh, we're busy, we'll turn it down. We're drying up, we'll turn up the volume a bit.
So interesting to hear about some of the practicalities and different sort of considerations you have to take throughout the progression of the trial, as well as just in the planning stages of it. We heard from quite a lot of research officers and their personal and professional development and the enthusiasm that they had, I think, for conducting and being involved in this research as well. I'll start with Rebecca, and then maybe Jeremy, you'd be able to speak to this specifically to your area. But has the participation in this research influenced how the clinicians or research officers will work in the future, or maybe be engaged with other clinical trials or research studies?
Well, it's a hard one to answer. I mean, I feel like I should bring them into the room and ask them.
The next video recording will do.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as someone managing a trial, one of the things that I've learned is having Taylor involved to support the researchers was incredibly helpful, because this is a role which is challenging, dealing with really vulnerable people. And I think often it's taken for granted. And I had to push pretty hard at the start to have that incorporated, and not successfully at first. It was just, we brought Taylor on board as a research officer. I mean, not a research officer, a research postdoc. And she just happened to have a clinical degree, and she was able to take up that role. And I think it shows that having someone in your team with that clinical experience is really invaluable for supporting research officers. It's been, I don't think you could do it otherwise, not for 2 years. The burnout rates would be really high. Anyway, it doesn't quite answer your question, so I'll see, maybe Jeremy can put more insights.
Well, just at a local level, Beck is now going to be employed by our service. So she's sort of graduated from research to clinical, which is great. The other two doctors, so we were 3 doctors who were kind of doing the registration into the trial, and the other 2 have been enjoying the role and looking for new opportunities to be involved in research. So yeah, I think it's given people a taste of what's involved, and they're certainly eagerly awaiting the final results.
I bet. And what a high standard for a workforce that you have set through this trial. It's to be commended. We've got a question here around the dose that was provided of mirtazapine in the study.
So mirtazapine for depression is, the dosing starts at 15 milligrams and can go up to 60 milligrams a day. Usually you would taper people up until it's effective. For methamphetamine, there weren't guidelines around that, and it's a new drug. It's a new indication, I should say, for an old drug. And the 2 studies in the US both used 30 milligrams. So we didn't really have a precedent for what dose to use other than those 2 studies. For those of you who aren't familiar with mirtazapine, it has a really unusual pharmacological profile. So at low doses, it causes more sedation through its histamine action. And as the dose goes up, you get more serotonin and more noradrenergic effects, which the serotonin can make you sleepy and increase your appetite, but the norepinephrine can actually increase your arousal. So that's a paradoxical effect of being more stimulating at higher doses. I'm saying this because our ethics committee wanted to follow the guidelines for depression and start people on 15 milligrams. And I pushed back very hard against this, along with our investigator team, because one of the most common and annoying side effects is the sedation, which happens at the lower dose. And we didn't want to deter people from taking it. And also we're dealing with a population of people who you could describe as pharmacological sponges. Like, they're not naive to using drugs, and they're taking methamphetamine. So it's not likely that the 30 milligrams of mirtazapine is going to knock them out. And I think Jeremy can probably speak more to the participants' reactions to the drug, whether they found that to be too high a dose or whether they found that to be okay.
Yeah, I think 30 milligrams was the right dose for starting people. That's what we do in practice, I'm afraid, whatever the guidelines say. What was a bit disappointing was the ethics wanted the 15 milligrams taper at the end, which really makes very little sense, as we discussed at the time in the early days. And as for what the patients felt, well, I think a proportion of them, and I don't know how many, guessed whether they were on the real thing or not. We didn't know, they didn't know, so it was a sort of educated guess. And I'm sure some of them were wrong and some of them were right. So in the end, I think 30 milligrams, if we were doing this again, I think this would be the right dose to start with.
I do know that in the UK, they're trying to get funding for a mirtazapine trial where they're allowing a bit more flexibility around the dosing. And I think that would be good, because some people might want more. One of the participants anecdotally wrote to us, gave us some feedback and said, you know, I actually found it worked really well when I took 15 milligrams at night and 45 in the day, which wasn't how it was meant to be taken. It's not a bad idea, actually.
So interesting. And again, practicalities of a trial when participants are changing up the dose. We've spoken about the trial and the actual data collection, and you've alluded to the data analyses being underway. We have a question. When you're doing the analysis, what will you deem a clinically significant reduction in meth use? So distinguishing from statistically significant, which is just where there's a statistical difference. What's a clinically meaningful reduction in methamphetamine?
So it's a really good question. We powered the study to detect at least a reduction of probably about 3 days, saying, well, you know, if we get anything less than that, we wouldn't consider it to be too meaningful.
Sorry, 3 days, like absolute reduction in 3 days a month?
Yeah, between groups, like 2 to 3 days would be what you'd want to get at least to be clinically meaningful. But we don't have good data on how that would translate into functional outcomes. And one of the caveats, I've just been talking to the research team this morning. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them put that question into the box because what they're saying is we've only measured days of use, and anecdotally, what they're saying is people have reduced how much they're using quite a lot. And we find that very hard to capture reliably in research. So I think that's a real caveat around the measures that we're using. We can't overcome that, but it does speak to this whole question that we have as a field, like how much do people have to reduce? Like if you're talking about alcohol and you reduced your drinking from 10 standard drinks a day down to 1, that would be a great outcome. But with methamphetamine, there's this expectation that people must become abstinent. Certainly the FDA have pushed the abstinence as being the outcome that we should be looking for. And it's a very high bar. And it would be good to have a better handle on, well, how much do people need to reduce their use to improve their health and well-being and reduce the risk of adverse outcomes?
Leaves a lot potentially for future research in the various different outcomes and ways that we can look into this. We have a question here which is a little bit cheeky. Is there anything you would do differently if you ran the trial again from scratch?
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of things. I learned so much from it. I'm not sure that I can think of one particular thing. Yeah, that I really want to speak to here at least. But one thing that does frustrate me about these trials is that this is 5 years. It took 2 years just to get going. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved, a lot of paperwork, a lot of people who seem to want to shut the trial down halfway through because that's their job, to audit things. And I'm not kidding you. And just go, oh no, we're not sure about this. Maybe you can reapply for ethics, and of course everything's fine. So there's no way you can overcome or reduce that bureaucracy, but it'd be nice if we could make that more efficient. But 5 years is a long time to get a result. It's a lot of bureaucracy to go through. And now I feel like we're doing everything in series. So I finished another trial of N-acetylcysteine that took 4 years, 5 years for this trial. How long are we going to wait? And I guess I think maybe the way forward is looking a little bit more at what they do with COVID research and looking at platform trials and how we can not just put one option on the table, but maybe multiple options on the table for people to give them a bit more flexibility. Because there are a lot of things I might do differently in this trial. But yeah, I think that's the big one. Like, if we've built this machine, let's use it to do more than one drug at a time.
Yeah, that's exactly where your mind goes to, the efficiency, that's probably a better word, of the way that the COVID trials and testing was done. Yeah, I remember you speaking about this 5 years ago and saying it was coming up. It's 5 years, a very long time. We are fast approaching the end of the hour, so I might ask a question to you both. I'll start with you, Jeremy. What motivates you to work in this complex and sometimes stigmatized field? Your ongoing clinical work, but also involvement in this research. Why this area, Jeremy?
Well, it's very rewarding when people start getting better, and that's a really good outcome. And there are many different struggles that people face, and if you can help them manage their substance use, then they're going to be much better prepared for dealing with the rest of their life. So that's one of the motivations. I think it's an interesting area. I started out when I was in Mount Isa with methadone patients, and my interest sort of grew from there. And Mount Isa, there's a lot of drinking, so there was plenty to get involved with there. And really that's been an opportunity to pursue in Brisbane. So it's been a very interesting and rewarding process.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. Rebecca?
Well, I don't know why I started another clinical trial, because it was very painful to finish the first one. But as soon as I finished it, people were emailing going, when are you starting the next trial? And the thing I love about it is that you're actually directly providing people with some kind of access to services they wouldn't ordinarily get. And that is just infinitely rewarding. It makes you feel like you're actually making a difference. And regardless of whether the medication you're trialing works or not, as long as it's not harmful, I mean, you're getting people into a health service. About half of our group had never received treatment for their methamphetamine use before. And those people have now experienced being part of a health service and getting access to care. And that's invaluable to me.
Absolutely. Look, I think that the overview that you presented today of your experiences going through this trial has been invaluable to everybody watching this, those planning future trials, considering future trials. So bravo, and a huge credit to you, Rebecca, for leading it, and Jeremy for your involvement, and the whole TINA trial team. It's commendable, bravo. That does bring us to the end of the hour. Thank you both so much for your time, and to the audience for watching this hour. I will spruik our upcoming webinar, which will be next week, yes, with Mr. Oisin Stronach, who will be presenting on an age period cohort interaction analysis of, again, on the topic of methamphetamine related deaths in Australia. So we look forward to you tuning in then, and wish everybody a fabulous rest of your afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rihanna.
Thank you.